18. Chloe Haynes. One of the most noteworthy pre-COVID mid-flight meltdowns to make news headlines occurred on a Jet2 plane while en route from London to Turkey in 2019. 26-year-old Chloe Haynes was traveling with her wheelchair-bound grandmother and taking swigs out of a bottle of gin tucked into her carry-on when she became disruptively drunk. It started with the young woman simply being unsteady on her feet and slurring her words, but the situation eventually devolved into a full-blown fit of rage which led to her screaming, crying, singing, and trying to open the emergency exit while threatening to kill everyone on the plane. As cabin crew members and passengers rushed to stop Chloe from opening the door, the pilot turned the plane around and headed back to England. In the meantime, 2 Royal Air Force fighter jets were dispatched to intercept the plane. Jet2 fined Haynes £85,000 and imposed a lifetime ban on flying with the airline. She was also hit with criminal charges and ended up pleading guilty to assault by beating and endangering the safety of an aircraft. The troubled woman wept as the judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison. It seems like Haynes was in a downward spiral because just 17 days before the in-flight tantrum, she had been convicted of drunk driving. These incidents pointed toward a deeper problem regarding the role alcohol played in her life at the time. Thankfully, she started attending AA meetings after the outburst and expressed deep remorse for her behavior at her sentencing, indicating that she had the capability of getting her life on track if she wanted to. 17. Kathy Lukes. During what was supposed to be a routine midday traffic stop in September 2023, a police officer in Palmer, Ohio, observed a car with expired plates driving 43 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. Behind the wheel was 66-year-old Kathy Lukes, who served as the mayor of nearby North Royalton from 1999 to 2007. Lukes allegedly acted uncooperative from the get-go and refused to obey the officer's commands. In body cam footage of the conversation, she acted noticeably disorientated and confused. As she responded no to the officer's questions about whether she had her license with her or if she could put her car in park, Lukes rolled up the window and hit the gas. She led police on a brief high-speed chase, which ended when her vehicle jumped a curb and crashed into a tow truck. After being pulled out of her car and handcuffed at the scene, Lukes refused to get into a police cruiser. The ex-politician kept asking for her stuff and said, "What you're doing is wrong. Let me tell you how it works." And of course, she made sure to remind the officers that she was the former North Royalton mayor. Lukes was charged with operation while intoxicated, speeding, having an open container of alcohol in a vehicle, and driving with expired plates. She pleaded not guilty and was released on a $5,000 bond, with instructions to return to court at a later date. 16. Aaron Gregory. In an emergency call that would be considered unusual almost anywhere other than Florida, 911 dispatchers in Brevard County received a report about a drunk man riding a Walmart scooter one morning in July of 2023. Responding deputies arrived at the store in Melbourne to find a disorientated man, later identified as 39-year-old Aaron Gregory, swerving around as he attempted to drive one of the store's motorized buggies. A loss prevention worker reportedly told law enforcement that Gregory was driving into shelves and displays and almost hitting other customers as he zoomed around the store haphazardly. According to a police report, the suspect was so drunk that he could barely stand without assistance and needed to be removed from the store on a stretcher. In the scooter's basket, deputies found Gregory's backpack, which contained a bottle of Smirnoff vodka. In the report, the responding officer noted that he'd observed Gregory swaying with glassy eyes and a distinct odor of alcohol on his breath. The cop wrote that he tried interacting with Gregory, but he was so intoxicated that he was unable to answer any questions. When the officer asked for the suspect's ID, he appeared to reach for his wallet, but he was unable to actually dig into his pocket. The report further stated that 2 officers had to help Gregory from the patrol car to the police station. Yet as drunk as he seemed, he was somehow aware enough of the situation to refuse a breathalyzer. The disruptive driver was charged with driving under the influence, which may seem silly since Walmart scooters have an average maximum speed of 10 miles per hour. But it's considered a motor vehicle under Florida law, and Gregory was therefore charged accordingly. He was also charged with misdemeanor counts of disorderly intoxication and possession of an open container of alcohol. 15. Margaret Barnes. After arriving in the seaside resort town of Barmouth in North Wales for a staycation in 2023, 71-year-old Margaret Barnes stopped to drink at a bar. She was there to visit friends and was looking forward to spending time together. But her vacation was unexpectedly cut short after she had too much to drink during her evening out and mistook a man's home for her bed and breakfast. Unaware that she was in the wrong building, Barnes entered a bedroom and went to sleep. The homeowner, 46-year-old David Redfern, was understandably shocked to arrive home with his partner and find the senior citizen snoozing away in his bed. But instead of trying to handle the situation rationally, he became aggressive. Redfern dragged Barnes downstairs by her feet and proceeded to physically assault the much smaller, much older woman, causing numerous internal injuries and broken ribs. He threw Barnes' luggage out into the street and cruelly mocked her as she ran after it and began complaining of chest pains. The elderly woman collapsed on the ground and became unconscious as she went into cardiac arrest. And sadly, Barnes died from her injuries despite Good Samaritan's efforts to save her. Redfern was charged with murder and manslaughter. During his trial, he argued that Barnes had charged at his partner and had struck her in self-defense. Meanwhile, the prosecution pointed out a conflicting story Redfern had previously given, in which he claimed to have accidentally tripped and fallen on the victim. The court also heard about how Redfern admittedly had anger issues, and the jury found him guilty of murder despite his claims of innocence. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 14 years. 14. Henry Mead. During the 2023 holiday season, 40-year-old Henry Mead picked up some extra work driving a children's train during the annual Christmas tractor parade in Tazewell. The so-called Santa's train was actually just a lawnmower disguised to look like a festive locomotive, with 2 cars attached for pulling passengers around. At some point during the event, people began to notice that Mead appeared unsteady on his feet, so suspecting that he was intoxicated, a police officer conducted a breathalyzer. The hunch proved correct, and the police also found methamphetamine, a syringe, and other narcotics in the suspect's possession. Mead's Saturday night temporary gig was cut short, and he was booked into the Clybourne County Jail on suspicion of driving under the influence, methamphetamine possession, and additional drug counts. In a statement announcing the arrest, the Tazewell Police Department made sure to mention that Mead hadn't been hired by the city for the train driving job, and that he was working through a private contractor when the incident occurred. 13. Tamara Louise Lorimer. Australian couple Tamara Louise Lorimer and Doreen Joan Lindsay were drinking heavily with their friends at their home in Broome in November 2021 when they received a call from a friend who needed some help. Lorimer and 3 others piled into a car and began backing out of the driveway right as Lindsay walked into the vehicle's path. Without meaning to, Lorimer reversed over her 35-year-old girlfriend, who died from her injuries despite the best efforts of emergency responders to save her life. Police noted that Lorimer was intoxicated, causing them to question why she got behind the wheel in the first place, and they learned that Lindsay was also drunk at the time of the accident. A blood alcohol test showed Lorimer's level at 0.121, which is above the legal limit for driving. She was charged with manslaughter, but maintained her innocence in court, blaming the tragedy on the driveway shape and a supposed blind spot. Based on Lorimer's claims, it would have been impossible for her to see Lindsay in her path no matter how drunk or sober she was. But the judge disagreed, describing the incident as a wasteful tragedy with no winners. Lorimer was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 2026 after serving 3 years behind bars. 12. Efren Ramirez. While working routine patrol on a Saturday afternoon in March of 2019, a sheriff's deputy in Spartanburg County, South Carolina spotted a vehicle speeding, swerving, and weaving along an interstate. So he pulled the car over and quickly called for backup. When the backup deputy arrived, the cop who was already on the scene told him that both the driver and the passenger of the vehicle had been drinking beer. He further explained that when he approached the vehicle, he saw the driver, 49-year-old Efren Ramirez, spraying Axe body spray into his mouth in an attempt to mask the smell of alcohol. The suspicious motorist didn't have a valid driver's license, and there was a 12-pack of Corona on the passenger side floorboard. All but one of the beer bottles were open, nearly all of them were completely empty, and the passenger allegedly had an open beer resting between his legs. As it turned out, Axe body spray doesn't effectively cover up the smell of booze. After pulling Ramirez aside for a one-to-one chat, one of the deputies noticed the distinct odor of alcohol and that the suspect's eyes were glassy. Ramirez claimed he'd only drank one beer, but a language barrier prevented the conversation from going much further. As a result, he was charged with drunk driving, driving without a license, driving without insurance, and having an open container. 11. Eberson de Oliveira. In a horrifying confrontation that was captured on CCTV footage in early 2023, a Brazilian mother of one named Fabilis Felipe de Almeida could be seen approaching a drunk man and telling him to stop talking so loudly into his phone. The 37-year-old had reportedly just finished working for the day in the city of Fortaleza and was stopping to meet with friends for happy hour when she crossed paths with the disruptive fellow bar patron. The noisy man, 51-year-old Eberson de Oliveira, was drinking alcohol when Fabilis entered the bar. He then proceeded to stand right next to her as he continued to speak far louder than necessary. After telling Oliveira to quiet down and exchanging some heated words, Fabilis appeared to slap her adversary, who proceeded to plunge a knife into her chest. She managed to stay on her feet, while pools of blood formed quickly on the ground beneath her. Bystanders rushed over to help prop her up, and in the meantime, Oliveira cautiously backed away and then fled the scene on foot. Fabilis was rushed to the hospital, where she clung to life for 2 days before succumbing to her injuries. Police apprehended Oliveira 5 days after the stabbing and booked him into custody on a murder charge. Speaking with the press, Fabilis' 20-year-old daughter described her mother as extremely calm and patient, which only makes it even more curious that she saw fit to raise her voice at Oliveira that night. According to the most recent updates, the investigation is ongoing. 10. Jesse Mayer. In 2019, 56-year-old Rob Christofowicz traveled from his home in East Aurora, New York, to North Reddington Beach, Florida, with his best friend Mark Nowak. The men were out on jet skis one afternoon when Nowak heard a loud crash behind him, coming from the same direction that Christofowicz was riding in. A 37-foot boat had plowed into Christofowicz at an estimated speed of over 70 miles per hour, killing him at the scene and leaving his body horribly maimed. The boat's operator, 35-year-old Jesse Mayer, was accused of being both drunk and reckless behind the wheel. Investigators observed several signs of intoxication, including bloodshot eyes, dilated pupils, the smell of alcohol on Mayer's breath, and a seemingly unsteady stance. According to court documents, his blood alcohol level tested much higher than the legal threshold for a boat captain and for driving a boat. Mayer was arrested on suspicion of BUI manslaughter, vessel homicide, reckless operation of a vehicle, and violation of navigation rules. But his defense team managed to stall the court proceedings for 4 years before the case finally went to trial in 2023. As many as 20 of Christofowicz's friends and family members traveled to Pinellas County from Buffalo to attend the hearings, and Mayer's own daughter testified against him at his trial. The jury found Mayer guilty of vessel homicide, and he was sentenced to a little over 9 years in prison. At the hearing, his attorney requested a new trial, which the judge denied, and Mayer is now reportedly in the process of appealing his case. 9. Troy Masco. 73-year-old Australian postmaster John Burke was just doing his job and providing service with a smile when he greeted a woman and her daughter at his post office in Strathmerton, Victoria in 2021. The woman took Burke's friendliness the wrong way and mentioned it to her boyfriend, 44-year-old Troy Masco, who was drunk and high on marijuana at the time. Having consumed several beers and shots of Jack Daniels, he wasn't exactly in the right frame of mind when he picked up a 1-liter bottle of sports beverage and chunked it full force at Burke's head. The senior citizen fell onto the hard-tiled floor and lay helplessly as Masco kicked him and stomped on his glasses. 11 weeks later, Burke passed away in the hospital due to blood clots in his brain. In 2023, Masco was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 8 years behind bars, with the requirement to serve at least 5 in prison. Judge Lex Lasry acknowledged that the defendant felt genuinely remorseful for his actions, but he also admonished Masco for the unprovoked attack, which the judge described as despicable and the kind of violence that society abhors. 8. Avinash Po. In a robbery gone wrong that went partially unsolved for 3 decades, a 55-year-old man and his 50-year-old wife were brutally killed during a home invasion in Lonavala, India in October 1993. 2 of the 3 suspects were quickly apprehended. Meanwhile, the third intruder, 19-year-old Avinash Po, managed to slip out of sight. He fled the area and moved to the city of Aurangabad, where he assumed the alias Amit Po. The fleeing fugitive then moved around between various locales and eventually ended up in Mumbai. Over the years, Po married and built an entirely new life based on his false identity. He put his past behind him, vowing to never look back, and he also got comfortable enough to not worry about getting caught. However, Po blew his own cover 30 years after the double murder, when he confessed to someone about the crime during a drinking session. The person tipped off the police, who promptly took the 49-year-old into custody to finally face justice for his actions. 7. Kimberly Gable. During a visit to a Red Lobster restaurant in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2018, 42-year-old Kimberly Gable got a little too rowdy for the atmosphere. The alleged drunk diner was asked to leave because she was disturbing customers who were trying to enjoy their Saturday afternoon lunch. According to an arrest affidavit, Gable began swearing as she headed toward the door, and as she huffed and puffed her way past a lobster tank, she allegedly reached in, grabbed a live one, and fled on foot with the crustacean in hand. Gable was still in the general area when a sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene in response to a call about the lobster theft. While speaking with the poorly behaved patron, the deputy noticed that her breath smelled strongly of alcohol and that her speech was slurred. And when asked about the stolen lobster, Gable said that she had no knowledge of the specimen's whereabouts. She went on to explain that she didn't know where the creature was because she was blacked out drunk, and that she didn't care because she didn't do anything wrong. Gable was charged with misdemeanor disorderly intoxication, making it the latest in a long list of priors which included theft, drug possession, open container, domestic battery, exposure of one's privates, drunk driving, and resisting an officer. 6. Richard Smith. Former South African police officer Richard Smith liked having his work-issued gun with him at all times. After being accused of assault twice, he was lucky he was still allowed to have the weapon, and even more fortunate he hadn't yet lost his job. When the Piketberg cop clocked out of work for a vacation in early 2022, he took the gun with him, even though it's customary for officers to turn their firearms in before taking a holiday. He then proceeded to spend an entire day drinking heavily at home, causing him to pass out for several hours. Smith also spent a large portion of the day harassing and stalking his girlfriend, Natasha Boyce, with an onslaught of text messages and phone calls, demanding to know her locations and movements. Boyce and her family were out sightseeing and photographing landmarks when the barrage of obsessive correspondence came flooding in. Wanting to focus on quality time with loved ones, Boyce told Smith that she would talk to him when she got home later that day. According to investigators, Smith sent so many messages and calls that he had to stop and buy more minutes for his phone. After doing so, he tracked Boyce down. A confrontation occurred between the two, and as Boyce tried to walk away, Smith pulled out his beloved gun and shot her in the back, killing her at the scene. He then went and parked outside the police station where he worked and spent several minutes thinking about his next move before ultimately deciding to continue drinking. It wasn't long before Smith was arrested for murder. In court, he argued that he was only stalking Boyce so closely that day because he was planning to cheat on her and wanted to ensure he wouldn't get caught. He didn't give much of an explanation for shooting Boyce other than, "I just shot. There was no reason." During Smith's trial, the judge questioned why he chose to carry his gun when he was so drunk, especially since doing so goes against the police department's policy. Smith essentially said that he wasn't really thinking about how something terrible might happen because it was a habit to always have the gun on him. The disgraced former cop was convicted of Boyce's murder and was sentenced to life in prison as a result. He also received a 3-year sentence for attempted murder for threatening to kill Boyce's cousin, 1 year for pointing a gun at the young woman, 3 years for using a gun while drunk, and 3 more years for driving drunk. 5. Shelton Bee. An infamous Arizona man named Shelton Bee first went viral in October 2018 when he made news headlines for catching a DUI charge on a bird scooter in Tempe. The 26-year-old's intoxicated joyride was brought to the attention of law enforcement after he crashed the scooter into a Dodge Dart. During her phone call to the police, the car's owner noted that Bee was swerving in the middle of the road and that he seemed drunk. And at one point, he fell off the scooter and took a spill onto the pavement. According to police, Bege's blood alcohol content was more than 3 times the legal limit at 0.285. Responding officers noticed signs of intoxication, including slurred speech, and Bee failed a series of field sobriety tests. When questioned about his alcohol consumption, he said that he consumed 2 cans of Bud Light. But his erratic scooter driving made the claim highly questionable, along with the stash of booze in his backpack, which included a 16-ounce beer and several mini bottles of banana-flavored liquor. In addition to the DUI count, Bee was charged with reckless driving, criminal damage, and other counts. His booze and scooter were also seized as evidence. Bee was in the news again 4 months later when he failed to appear at 2 separate court arraignments in connection with his criminal cases. But he would never be picked up on his warrants because he tragically passed away just days after authorities announced that they were looking for him. A witness saw Bee stumbling into the road just after midnight and tried to warn him about oncoming traffic, but he went into the road anyway and was fatally struck by a car. He was pronounced dead at the scene. 4. Darren Osmond. British couple Darren Osmond and Claire Holland were brought together by a shared drinking habit in 2008. They were both heavy boozers, and unlike many people, becoming parents failed to motivate them to cut back on their alcohol intake. After losing custody due to their lifestyle in 2010, the couple went their separate ways. 2 years later, in June 2012, Claire vanished after leaving a pub in Bristol at around 11:15 p.m. one night. She hasn't been seen since, and although her body has never been found, authorities believe she was murdered. At the time of her disappearance, she was just 32 years old. 8 years after Claire went missing, an undercover officer going by the name Paddy O'Hara befriended Darren to see if he would eventually confess to killing Claire. Believing O'Hara to be an underworld figure, Darren opened up to his new friend during conversations that were secretly tape recorded and later shared in court. Then, in 2022, authorities charged him with Claire's murder. Darren maintained his innocence and continues to do so now, but he also allegedly confessed to some level of involvement in Claire's disappearance to at least 5 people, in addition to the undercover agent, including friends, police officers, a new girlfriend, an emergency phone line operator, and a fellow inmate he befriended while being detained ahead of his trial. When the case went to trial in late 2023, the jailhouse informant testified that Darren and Claire had gotten into an argument while drinking at a park hours after Claire was last seen leaving the pub. According to the inmate's claims, the exes gone together after first getting in touch on the phone to discuss a custody-related matter. During the disagreement that broke out at the park, Claire blamed Darren for treating her badly during their relationship, while Darren pointed the finger at Claire for their parental rights being revoked. The fight became physical, with Claire taking the first strike and Darren putting his hands around her throat. When the fellow prisoner asked about the location of Claire's body, Darren allegedly said that her remains were unrecoverable and that he had knife skills, which prosecutors interpreted as a hint that the young woman had been chopped up. During a court hearing, Darren denied ever confessing to the jailhouse informant, claiming it was all lies. He admitted that he'd taken credit for Claire's disappearance with numerous other people, but blamed these confessions on him being a drunk idiot who was trying to will an explanation into existence. Darren also claimed that he was trying to make himself seem big and like something he's not. From the outside looking in, it seems entirely plausible that Darren might have lost all self-control during a drunken argument, especially given the ample amount of testimony the court has heard about his explosive temper. But without a confession or a body, questions will continue to linger regarding Claire's fate and whereabouts. So for now, Darren's criminal case appears to be ongoing. 3. Tony Haas. 35-year-old Timothy Mumbrew and his girlfriend, 23-year-old Tanner Togstad, were viciously stabbed to death at Togstad's Weyauwega, Wisconsin home in March of 1992. The case quickly became a whodunit and remained unsolved for more than 3 decades. Over the years, investigators revisited the case multiple times. They retested evidence, interviewed numerous people, carried out search warrants, and collected DNA samples. Detectives eventually identified a man named Tony Haas as a potential suspect. He was 21 years old when the double murder occurred. In 2022, law enforcement stealthily obtained a sample of Haas's DNA during a traffic stop, and it turned up as a match to a sample belonging to the suspected killer. During questioning, he explained that his father had died in a snowmobile accident when he was a child, and that Tanner Togstad's father was involved in the tragedy. Haas also told police that he had flashbacks in the form of snippets that caused him to fear that he was involved in the murders and had no conscious memory of it. One of these so-called snippets included a memory of vomiting near the front steps of someone's home. According to a criminal complaint, Haas explained that he got very drunk while bar hopping on the night of the crime, which caused him to reflect on the tragedy that claimed his father's life. And in his drunken stupor, he began thinking about going to Togstad's home. Then he actually did it. After supposedly being unable to remember the murders for so long, the details were now apparently coming to mind. Haas allegedly confessed to the killings and described getting in a scuffle with Mumbrew, punching Togstad unconscious and stabbing both victims. He claimed that he didn't plan to hurt anyone and was unable to explain what his motive was. And when asked about the murder weapon, Haas said he couldn't remember whether he brought the knife with him or if he obtained it at the scene. More than 30 years after the victims' lives were senselessly taken, authorities charged Haas with 2 counts of first-degree murder, which he pleaded not guilty to. As of December 2023, a trial date still hasn't been set due to numerous delays and both parties needing extra time to review evidence and prepare. The next court hearing, however, is scheduled for March of 2024. 2. Jay Webster. During a night out in Caerphilly, South Wales in April 2023, 28-year-old Jay Webster and 27-year-old Benjamin Lloyd got into an argument on the street after being denied entry into a bar for being too drunk. It was a rather trivial disagreement, but it took a serious turn when the two friends started trading blows. After taking 2 punches from Lloyd, Webster punched his buddy in the head, causing him to fall and smack his skull against the pavement. As soon as it happened, Webster began to panic. He frantically pleaded with his unresponsive buddy to get up, while telling onlookers that he didn't mean for that to happen. But much to everyone's relief, Lloyd regained consciousness. He turned down an ambulance and tried hailing a cab while Webster went to another pub and continued drinking. When Lloyd arrived home, his family noticed that he was in bad condition and urged him to get medical help. But he refused and went to bed. Later that night, Webster stopped by and apologized to Lloyd's mother for the fight that had happened between the young men hours earlier. Lloyd's father checked in on him throughout the night, but life-saving efforts failed when he found his son unresponsive the next morning. When police arrested Webster later that day, he seemed surprised to learn that Lloyd was dead, and he described his condition the previous night as 9 out of 10 drunk. Webster pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. While delivering a victim impact statement, Lloyd's mother told Webster that she harbored no ill will toward him for her son's death and that she believed it truly was an accident. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Grant Bradley. While out drinking at a pub in South Gloucestershire, England, one day in June of 2022, Marcus Dunkerton punched his associate, 47-year-old Grant Bradley, in the face during a disagreement. After leaving the bar later on, Bradley retrieved a knife and walked to Dunkerton's house with a plan to settle the score. he entered the residence, where Dunkerton was asleep on the sofa, and stabbed him repeatedly while the victim's partner tried unsuccessfully to intervene. Bradley then left the scene and walked home while Dunkerton lay dying in a pool of his own blood, and sadly the victim was pronounced dead at the scene. An autopsy found that Dunkerton had 13 injuries, including 5 stab wounds. One of the wounds had severed his femoral artery, causing him to bleed out extremely fast. Soon enough, the police came knocking on Bradley's door. He claimed that it only meant to hurt Dunkerton, but that he didn't mean to kill his friend. He also tried accusing the victim's girlfriend of being involved. More specifically, Bradley told investigators that his goal was to stab Dunkerton in the buttocks, so it would be painful and uncomfortable to sit down for a while. A jury rejected Bradley's claim that he already had the knife with him when he showed up at Dunkerton's home, instead concluding that the defendant had stopped home for the weapon beforehand. In the end, Bradley was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 23 years in prison. While handing down the punishment, the judge pointed out how several people had told Bradley to cool down when the initial argument between him and Dunkerton broke out. But he let his booze and his temper get the best of him, and now he's paying a hefty price for the needless tragedy. 12. Steve Sanvic. In November 2022, an employee of the Moa County Sheriff's Office in southern Minnesota reported their suspicions that Sheriff Steve Sanvic was drunk on the job. Sanvic was also accused of harassment and other questionable conduct. A peace officer who's trained to identify signs of intoxication determined that Sanvic had been drinking that day. The conclusion was reportedly based on the officer's observation of the sheriff's bloodshot eyes, the smell of alcohol, and Sanvic's demeanor and manner of speech. In an email to the Globe, County Administrator Trish Harron said that the sheriff was advised that he'd be pulled over and tested for alcohol if he got behind the wheel. So, someone else drove him home that day, and an investigation was launched 2 days later. A few weeks after the incident, Sanvic took a leave of absence. He told the Globe that he was taking time off for medical reasons and denied being drunk on the job. An independent law firm tasked with carrying out the investigation learned from employees that Sanvic was in a good mood on the day in question, but that several employees noticed he didn't seem like himself. In its findings, the law firm concluded that the misconduct allegations against Sanvic were unsubstantiated, but that he was drunk on the job that day. The report concluded that his condition was triggered by post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of the documents relating to the case are being withheld from the public. Emails obtained by ABC6 included allegations that the sheriff had behaved strangely on at least 2 previous occasions, including during the local Christmas-time shop with a cop event. But apparently, these claims were never investigated. In early 2023, County Administrator Harron said that Sanvic underwent the recommended treatment protocols and made tremendous progress on his health, and since then, he's returned to work full-time. Shortly after Harron released the update, ABC6 obtained documents detailing Sanvic's threats to sue Harron for speaking publicly about his condition, treatment, and other personal business. An attorney sent Harron a cease and desist letter on the sheriff's behalf and warned that he'd seek up to $15,000 for each alleged violation of his privacy. So, since then, county representatives have remained tight-lipped on the situation. 11. Paula Valentina Rincon Delgado. While responding to a call about an accident at a car wash in Boca Raton, Florida in December 2022, Palm Beach County deputies found a young woman sitting next to a damaged Toyota Highlander. Identified as 20-year-old Paula Valentina Rincon Delgado, she was an employee at the car wash and had immigrated to the United States from Colombia. And also present at the scene were the business's manager and the owner of the Toyota. Speaking with law enforcement through an interpreter, Delgado explained that she had finished her work shift at around 6 p.m. Then 3 hours later, she met some friends at her home before returning to the car wash, where she took the keys to the Toyota. She drove the vehicle to a nearby gas station for cigarettes and ended up crashing the SUV. Delgado said that the accident happened in Boca Raton, but she couldn't remember exactly where, and that she called her manager right after it happened. According to a report, a deputy noticed the smell of booze while he talked to the young woman. He also noted that her eyes were glassy and red, her speech was slurred, and she was swaying back and forth. The car wash manager told investigators that he received a panicked call from Delgado at about midnight. He said he found her sitting in the damaged vehicle at a parking lot near his business. And after hearing the employee's version of events, the manager drove the Toyota back to the car wash. He then called the Highlander's owner, who'd left the vehicle at the car wash to be serviced, and informed them that the SUV had been involved in an accident. The vehicle's owner told the police that he didn't know Delgado and that he didn't give her permission to drive the Highlander. He called 911 because the crash involved his vehicle, and he wanted to make sure law enforcement didn't think he was the person responsible. Delgado performed poorly on a field sobriety test and refused a breathalyzer. In the end, she was charged with grand theft auto, DUI, leaving the scene of a crash, and driving without a valid license. 10. Linda Bullinger. In March 2014, a 55-year-old nurse from Muncie, Indiana, named Linda Bullinger lost her job at a nursing home for being drunk at work. According to state authorities, her blood alcohol content was 0.258, more than twice the legal limit for driving. Following Bullinger's termination, the Indiana State Board of Nursing revoked her license. But it was hardly her first brush with the law in regards to her alcohol use. Her long list of booze-related offenses began in 2008, when she was suspended from her job at a hospital amid allegations that she showed up at work drunk at 7 a.m. Co-workers reportedly raised the alarm after noticing that Bullinger's eyes were glassy and that her breath smelled like alcohol. A report of the incident quoted Bullinger as saying that she'd been out drinking until 4 a.m. that morning, and so she was charged with drunk driving and resisting law enforcement. In the end, Bullinger came to an agreement with the nursing board that allowed her to keep her license, but unfortunately she was let go from yet another job the following year for showing up to work with alcohol on her breath. In late 2022, Bullinger was on probation for the DUI, as well as reporting to work after drinking and failing to disclose to a new employer that she'd been let go from a previous job for alcohol-related reasons. And as a result, she was fired from another nursing home for allegedly coming to work while drunk. 4 months later, Bullinger experienced her final job loss that led to her license being revoked. And while she likely legitimately struggles with drinking, the system seems to have concluded that she didn't make good use of her chances to get her life back on track. 9. Dr. Jason Lane. In October 2013, a San Diego-based physician and surgeon named Dr. Jason Lane was so drunk at work that he collapsed and was taken to the emergency room. He had a blood alcohol content of 0.39, nearly 5 times the legal limit, and was fired from his job a few days later. According to a formal complaint filed by the California Medical Board, Lane had argued with his wife about his drinking the night before he fell at work. He drank 2 bottles of wine before bed, then woke up during the night and drank 8 more ounces of the beverage. Knowing that his drinking had gotten out of control, Lane completed a 7-day detox and then entered a 30-day rehab program. After that, he finished a 6-week outpatient treatment. He then continued focusing on his sobriety and mental health while attending AA meetings 5 to 6 times a week. In the meantime, he underwent exhaustive proceedings in an attempt to keep his medical license. He admitted that his binge drinking tendencies dated back to his college years and that the habit worsened after he served in the military and began struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. Lane's drinking was reportedly at its worst when he collapsed on the job, and by then he was drinking at least 1 bottle of wine daily and experiencing withdrawal symptoms throughout his workday. But he denied ever drinking on the job, even though he admitted to showing up at work drunk. The medical board eventually decided to give Lane a second chance at his career under a set of extremely strict rules. He was put on probation for 10 years, which includes regular drug and alcohol testing, routine mental health treatment and screenings, active participation in a 12-step program, and being under the supervision of another doctor. And as another consequence, Lane was also barred from overseeing physician's assistants. 8. William T. Marshall. When an aging former judge's relatives filed legal petitions for guardianship over his finances and assets in 2019, it opened up a huge can of worms that lent a cause for thousands of cases he ruled on to be reviewed. According to the lawsuit, William T. Marshall's finances were left in shambles due to his advanced alcoholism after he retired from his position in Scioto County, Ohio in 2018. The plaintiffs alleged that Marshall had been hospitalized multiple times due to his drinking and argued that he was unable to avoid drinking on his own due to the magnitude of his addiction. The suit also claimed that any continued drinking at that point could potentially be fatal to the ailing senior. Marshall's family accused him of showing up to work drunk countless times and often failing to go to work due to his drinking over his 15-year career. During that time, he presided over more than 2,700 cases that ended with prison sentences or other forms of court supervision. The alcohol-related allegations called into question whether these cases should be reviewed for signs that intoxication affected Marshall's rulings. The judge's history showed plenty of signs that his lifestyle was problematic. Back in 2013, he was convicted of driving under the influence after wrecking his car while drunk behind the wheel. And what's even more disturbing is that at least 3 women implicated Marshall for his alleged involvement in a large-scale human trafficking operation that a former city councilman is currently facing charges in connection with. Marshall denied the trafficking allegations and fought back against his family's accusations. Then, in 2020, he tried, unsuccessfully, to have his law license reinstated. 7. Dr. Robert Glick. When a hygiene dentist in Long Island, New York, noticed that her boss reeked of booze and had administered Novocaine to the wrong side of a patient's mouth one day in early 2013, she did the right thing and mentioned her suspicions to someone who could help. In a statement to police, Kimberly Curtis said that when she pointed out Dr. Robert Glick's Novocaine mistake, he simply ordered for the other side of the patient's mouth to be injected, leaving their entire mouth numb. Curtis also claimed that the dentist had shown up to work drunk in the past, and on one occasion she called Dr. Glick's wife because he was allegedly so intoxicated that he could barely stand on his own. During the more recent incident involving the anesthesia, Curtis texted a co-worker who called the police. She said she was especially nervous after seeing her boss use a drill that requires an extremely steady hand. After noticing that something seemed off about Glick's behavior, Curtis began paying more attention to his movements. Then, just moments after she saw him drinking out of a squeeze bottle, she said he walked past her emitting a strong alcohol odor. She claimed that she looked inside the bottle when she got a chance and that she was sure it was filled with vodka. According to Suffolk County Police, Glick initially denied being drunk, but admitted to having a few beers during lunch. But while riding in the back of a squad car on his way to deal with his arrest, he allegedly confessed to sipping vodka all day. And as a result, he was charged with misdemeanor reckless endangerment. It was a disappointing situation, considering Glick's good reputation up until that point. And while it's unclear exactly what happened with the case, it appears as though it was sorted out at some point, and that he's still practicing dentistry today. 6. Jessica Sue Proctor. Like many school districts throughout the US, the Iredell-Statesville School District in North Carolina has been affected by the ongoing national teacher shortage. So, to alleviate the problem, the district utilized the services of a company called the Stepping Stones Group, which helps to fill staffing voids by providing temporary teachers. In early 2023, school officials received a complaint accusing a newly hired temporary teacher of possibly being drunk on the job. The tipster accused 41-year-old Jessica Sue Proctor of smelling like alcohol during her second day on the job. Proctor was pulled from the classroom and brought down to the school's office, where it was determined that she was, in fact, intoxicated. She also allegedly had an empty bottle of wine and an insulated cup full of wine in her possession. Needless to say, the new job didn't work out. In a statement, the school district applauded the employee who came forward and reported Proctor's behavior after they noticed that something was off. And in the end, the terminated teacher was charged with misdemeanor counts of alcohol possession on a school campus and child neglect. 5. Lacy Freese. A 39-year-old nurse from Sioux County, Iowa, named Lacy Freese was accused of being drunk at work in 2022, amid reports that she was behaving strangely and using profanity. According to the complaint, Free appeared to be having trouble concentrating and was even seen dozing off on the job. 2 weeks later, Freese was accused of buying alcohol during her shift, even though she was acting normal that day. She was sent home for this, but she was supposedly seen buying booze again later that same night. The Iowa Board of Nursing charged Freese with excessive use of alcohol in a manner that might impair a nurse's ability to practice the profession with reasonable skill and safety. She then agreed to surrender her license. According to the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Freese had no previous disciplinary incidents on her record in the 7 years she spent working at the hospital. But she did have 3 DUI convictions from 2014, 2015, and 2016, along with a misdemeanor theft conviction for allegedly stealing $240 from a taxi driver in 2016. Then, in early 2023, she was charged with DUI yet again, after she was reportedly found slumped over in her car in a Target parking lot. 4. Kevin Mccorvey. While transporting a dialysis patient to treatment in Fairburn, Georgia in 2021, an ambulance suddenly veered off the shoulder of the road and fell into a ditch. The patient, 66-year-old Wilton Thomason Jr., was unrestrained in the back of the ambulance and died in the crash. Police accused the ambulance driver, 34-year-old Kevin Mccorvey, and his co-worker of trying to call an Uber to flee the scene. But after smelling alcohol on McCorvey's breath, a responding officer stopped the ambulance workers from leaving the scene and got the Georgia State Patrol involved. The suspect allegedly admitted to smoking pot, taking stimulants, and drinking a beer while driving. And as a result, he was charged with DUI, second-degree homicide by vehicle, failure to maintain lane, and possession of an open container. In June of 2023, authorities announced that McCorvey's case may go to trial in October. In another case of an ambulance driver being accused of operating under the influence, an emergency helicopter pilot named Aaron Fouquet was pulled over on his way to work in early 2023 after an officer saw him crossing the yellow center line. The incident happened in Elbert County, Colorado. According to the local sheriff's department, Fouquet was in his flight suit at the time of the traffic stop. He had a blood alcohol level of 0.08, the legal limit in most states, and was taken into custody on suspicion of driving while intoxicated. Shortly after the arrest, Fouquet resigned from his job. The case sparked questions about what would have happened if he'd made it to work that day. In a statement, his employer reassured the public that it tests its employees for drugs and alcohol at a higher rate than federal law required, and that there were measures in place to detect and prevent a drunk pilot from operating an aircraft. 3. Jeffrey Pupil. During a random drug and alcohol screening in mid-2023, a 9-year veteran of the Terre Haute, Indiana Police Department named Jeffrey Pupil allegedly tested positive when he was subjected to a breath alcohol test. The 33-year-old was transported to police headquarters and placed in a conference room, where a lieutenant reportedly observed the smell of booze and noticed that Pupil's eyes seemed bloodshot. Meanwhile, the officer's superiors analyzed the software in his patrol car that records the driver's speed and other habits. And the findings revealed that the car hit speeds as high as 93 miles per hour during Pupil's drive to work that day. According to a probable cause document, Pupil's blood alcohol content initially tested at 0.596, more than 7 times the legal limit. He was well into the range that puts a person at risk of coma or death, which starts at 0.4. Pupil took a second test, which came out at 0.5, and 15 minutes later, a third test showed a BAC of 0.446. By the time police obtained a warrant to draw the officer's blood 4 hours later, his BAC was at 0.125. He was placed on administrative leave and charged with operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated and endangering a person, as well as operating a vehicle with alcohol concentration equivalent to at least 0.08, but less than 0.15. Then, several weeks after his arrest, Pupil resigned from the department. But at the moment, his criminal case is ongoing. 2. Angela Herock. After noticing signs that their co-worker was intoxicated on the clock one day in 2017, employees at a daycare in West Des Moines, Iowa called the police. A responding officer observed that 43-year-old Angela Herock's eyes were bloodshot and she was unable to stand on her own. There was also a strong alcohol odor coming from her water bottle. According to local station KCCI, the tipsy childcare worker admitted to keeping vodka in a water bottle and drinking it throughout her workday. Herock had a blood alcohol content of 0.37, nearly 5 times the legal limit in Iowa, and a high enough level to put someone in the hospital. As a consequence, she was promptly fired from her job and arrested for child endangerment and public intoxication. Then, just when it appeared as though Herock was on the road to putting the situation behind her, she showed up drunk to her sentencing with a BAC of 0.178. So, she was taken back to jail pending the outcome of a new substance abuse valuation. 1. Trisha Nelson. Usually, when police are called to a fast food restaurant in the middle of the night, there's a problem with a customer or the location's been targeted in a crime. But it was an employee who was accused of wrongdoing when law enforcement responded to a Taco Bell restaurant in Evansville, Indiana in April 2023. According to a report, officers observed 2 of the restaurant's employees, 35-year-old Trisha Nelson and an individual whose name was withheld, yelling at a car in the drive-thru. Other workers said that Nelson and the other suspect were found drinking in the bathroom while the drive-thru became backed up during a rush. After watching the security footage and seeing that something unusual was going on, the manager called the restaurant and asked for an explanation. And when she learned that Nelson and another worker were in the bathroom drinking, she gave the go-ahead to fire the pair. While confronting Nelson outside, officers noticed the distinct odor of alcohol. She allegedly tried walking away from the scene multiple times, but eventually consented to a breathalyzer and blew a 0.208, which is more than 2.5 times the legal blood alcohol limit in Indiana. Nelson was also accused of becoming combative with police while being taken into custody. According to an arrest affidavit, she tried pulling away and kicking one officer and elbowed another one in the face as they loaded her into the transport van. As a result, she was charged with battery of an officer, public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and resisting law enforcement. Would you have an easier time overlooking the behavior of a drunk friend who never wants to go home at the end of a night out and has to practically be dragged out of a place, or a friend who tends to leave without notice in the middle of group outings? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.